to 36 trillion shillings that was actually spent on running government, in which case we are talking about public sector management, public administration, legislature, justice, law and order, defense and security, accountability and local government. It is the unwarranted investment that we are, albeit, talking about in particular regard to elements there. Public sector management, e.g. huge office of Prime Minister portfolio that competes with ministries in implementing rather than supervising them. Public administration, where a forest of foreign missions could shrink through institutional merging of, say, Denmark mission into one in Brazil. Brussels. And legislature. E.g., we have, if we have to go by what is happening now, we expect a stadium size of parliamentarians who are poised to consume a huge sum of money of about 900 billion annually, and the next parliament, that partly contributed to Uganda's having, that partly could have contributed to Uganda having the middle income status, which was promised earlier 2017-2020, and we are still counting. As such, we recommend that there is still room to shrink, merge, clean up, and release non-essential recurrent resources from such three sectors mentioned above, and institutions that are largely consumptive and less productive in nature. Then the country can afford investment in healthcare systems to avert death, social protection to avert destitution, and ethical imperative, or even COVID-19, and as such, future pandemics, as well as achieve the social contract between government and its citizens.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. We'll continue to the next element of the concerns.
In context of national budget sharing between central government and others, we remain concerned that local governments in Uganda through the NDP II period received additional funds from approximately 13% share in financial year 2015-16 to 9% in financial year 2019-20 in nominal terms. Yet the financing to local governments was also largely recurrent in nature. This mainly comprises of wages and non-wage spending. We already see that approximately 3.7 trillion was allocated to local governments in 2019-20 financial year. We recommend that direct financing and programming to local governments should increase to at least 25%, beginning with financial year 2021-22, and 50% by end of NDP III period, which is 2024-25. This will allow the local governments some legroom to go beyond merely recurrent spending to real development budget spending in areas where a majority of Ugandans dwell.
Thank you, Penina. Another issue we have is this one. I fear it now. It keeps jumping. Another issue we have is to do with obviously, as with debt servicing, the high cost of debt servicing through payment of principal and interest, then management charges, penalty fees, as we'll see later on. They are loans we've acquired and have actually not utilized or not utilized as fast to deliver service to Ugandans who at the other end of the tunnel are the ones that pay back these loans. So our concern is that even while debt payment alone is not the major problem, but the high cost. The other bit also that we are concerned about on debt repayment is the what we seem to see as the project-based kind of financing mode by those who give us money, as opposed to budget support. In other words, instead of getting money into the state coffers, we see some of these development actors put money separately, directly to a district, directly to a ministry. And we think that that is distortionary. It causes confusion. It creates a lot of lack of budget credibility in Uganda. It also complicates, it takes us back to where we have been, even when we had discussions like under the Paris Declaration on aid harmonization, which are internationally agreed standards and methods of doing things in development financing. So in Uganda, that happens still, and we think going forward under NDP III, that should not happen. The development partners need to sober up a bit again and be able to make sure that state institutions are respected, and then, of course, back home also clean up those state institutions so that they can be respectable. We've also seen that in Uganda, there is a creeping disease of supplementary budgets, and we've just taken a sample of just one financial year that ended, financial year 1920, where over 6 supplementary budgets were approved. And we get some of them even just like 3 days to end of the financial year. So we get concerns, therefore, in respect to, again, budget credibility, budget discipline, accountability. We think some institutions and some individuals may try to short-circuit the accountability standards and service delivery standards so that they can be able to absorb these kinds of huge funds that are released on last minute. That even then, we still see instances of low absorption because you've released the money so late, and therefore the absorption issues, partly contributed by supplementary budgets. And we think that going forward, that disease needs to be cured if the country is going to the next level of development expectation. We are also concerned about cases of low absorption again, particularly in respect to borrowed resources. And this partly contributes to the low disbursement, or is contributed by the low disbursement. And so on the other side, you keep with a lot of undisbursed resources that should have delivered service to Ugandans, which Ugandans at the end of the day are the taxpayers and are supposed to pay back these types of loans. Some votes or ministries, departments, agencies, and local governments have been notorious in low absorption. And we think that going into NDP III, going forward, that bit needs to be looked at squarely so that we can be able to see a lot of improvement. And we've given examples in the energy sector, for instance, huge funds of money being borrowed, but we do not see a lot of consumption, as should have been the case. Otherwise, if we were not ready, why did you go to borrow? Those kinds of monies continue to cause a lot of economic distortions, service delivery distortions, or lack of service delivery in time. And we think that as taxpayers, that is something that needs to be cured as we go into the next budget cycle for the forthcoming financial year 2021-22. We recommend as such also that beginning this coming financial year, the borrowed funds, the country should squarely deal with underperformance. You cannot underperform as a government official and you want to keep in that chair. You should have a lot of accountability to do to your bosses, to the executive, but also to the management, to the Ugandans. We've seen cases of, even when the pass mark for performance in Uganda is just 50%, you can imagine, just 50%. Some of the institutions have delivered at 32%. So we recommend that the pass mark should go higher to at least 60%, and therefore that means we have to do a lot of configuration back home in our respective institutions so that we can deliver. That's what we are paid to do, and that must be done. We also think that accounting officers who have continued to preside over government bodies that rejoice in stories of project planning and budget inadequacy issues, the work plans not matching the budget, the resources available, the no prior preparation for counterpart funding, so that as a ministry you capture that in your plans and have that given a priority if you know you are going to be using someone else's money. In areas where we've seen laxity of officers, you go to an office and the officers are nowhere to be seen. It is 11 a.m. At best, if you are lucky, you find coats, jackets on their seats. We think that that type of behavior going into the NDP II, even though it has started, NDP III, even though it has started a bit on a wobbling position because of COVID, needs to change. We must put up Ugandans expect a service. We cannot continue in the stories of being comfortable and being outside the office, yet we are paid precisely to do that. There should be punitive measures for those kinds of accounting officers because the public standing orders are clear. The anti-corruption laws in Uganda are clear. Otherwise, we shall continue in the lamentation, just like we did in NDP I, NDP II, as well in NDP III. We also think that the development partners should respect and adhere to budget support financing modality and not project-based, as we highlighted earlier on. We think we've been so far happy about the flagship model of investment. In other words, that if you have limited resources, you can't simply stagger money all over. Focus on some key sectors and projects that can deliver you a quicker dividend, a quicker benefit. And the government this far has done something. If we took a case of infrastructure development sectors, if you looked at energy, if you looked at the roads and bridges subsector, if you looked at ICT, we see huge financing has been going into those areas. And we could comfortably say that we have a bit of better energy supply than we did 5 years ago. We could say we have a better road network tarmacked in Uganda than we did 5 years ago. We think it is time for government to begin shifting resources to other critical areas of need. In the case of social sectors, for instance, education. At face value, it's like a lot of money has been spent on education, but we see a lot of room that still requires a lot of investment. If you looked at the health sector in Uganda, which is largely funded by donors, who could choose where their money should go, who could choose what fund or not fund for their own interests back home. But as a country, we must prioritize the health sector based on the needs, health needs and health care needs of our people as a country. If you looked at social development, that's where mainly you have Ministry of Gender, you have the elderly people, you have the children, you have people with special needs. We need to see money begin to shift those areas. And definitely, where will that money to shift come from? We think we should also prioritize investment in the productive sectors. If you looked at tourism, we think it is still attracting patrimony. We should see much more money in terms of investment, supportive investment for that sector. Increase industry and trade, water and environment, lands and housing. Those are productive sectors that can be able to generate us money as a country that then we can invest in other areas of need like the social sector. So as you can see, we recommend that the centrality of the production sectors in fostering economic growth and realization of NDP III under the various themes that have been coming up is something that we need to to shift to now, away from, not away but lesser in roads, lesser in energy, and more in some of these productive sectors. We think that through that we'll be able to get this country back on the course of development, even when COVID came in and caused a bit of wobbling across some of the sectors. Yeah, we could have a coup and corruption coalition.
The non-essential elements of recurrent budgets in some ministries, departments, agencies and local governments that have, over the NDP period, taken the lion's share of the total budget of these institutions, and certainly ahead of the development budget, should in the financial year 2021-22 release funds for His Excellency President Museveni's real economy proposals on Uganda's economic recovery and social protection. We are of the view that that the fact that the country's development investment interventions need to surpass the current population growth curve, the said real economy proposals should not be mere speeches. Rather, each of the ministries, departments, agencies and local governments should be assessed just like under the Equal Opportunities Commission on the extent to which they translate the real economic proposals into tangible and feasible public investment projects annually. The Uganda Development Corporation and Microfinance Support Center should have their lending for public-private investment projects and to a huge economic multiplier private sector projects at about 7% beginning this financial year 2021-2022 and gradually increase it by 3% annually over the NDP III implementation period. We also are of the view that in supporting the flagship spending and programming for production sectors, particularly agriculture, NAD's Operation Wealth Creation, need not simply supply breeding and planting materials, but rather invest in the entire value chain through synergies with other state and non-state actors, plus the attendant measures. The farmers need to be looked at squarely from general input, supply side, and not merely availing them only the breeding or planting materials. The OWC must consciously be in tandem with investment in the value chain, including water for production, police environment protection of wetlands to keep wetland and catchment areas alive, and even SACCOs and the microfinance support centers. The public investment in new roads must be linked to OWC interventions that consciously contribute to production capacity to feed into such roads, as well as secure market linkages. OWC must not create enclave production entities, but rather expanded productive capacities through linkages to other sectors. Now, on the misuse, wasteful expenditure or nugatory expenditures and accountability shortfalls occasioned by some ministries, departments, agencies and local governments, it is a shame that government can have qualified audits, as was in the case under the NDP II implementation period. To a Ugandan taxpayer, such is a manifestation of laxity in service delivery by public servants, underperformance, limited reporting standards, and corruption at a grand scale. We recommend that accounting officers that preside over such institutions that have received qualified audit report opinions be held personally liable rather than the entire government entity into opprobrium or disrepute, and expeditiously face punitive measures as the Public Finance Management Act 2015 as amended, and the Public Service Standing Orders and the Anti-Corruption Laws over the NDP III period.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, members. I think it is now very clear, and in my little economics, I understand that infrastructure development is actually complementary to development. Infrastructure spending is complementary to development. But sectors like agriculture, tourism, and so forth are facilitators for growth. So we are saying now, at least as colleagues have said, that now we have a good element of roads, power and all that. Now we should shift to the public sector spending, which would spur growth in our economy. And in conclusion, then, we are saying that despite the pandemic of COVID, the civil society actors seated here, unlike under NDP II, we have more faith. If we keep focused, prudent, we have more faith in NDP III. If we keep focused, prudent utilization of public resources, this has been mentioned up, sanctioning of specific officers individually, you live to the value of incorporation, who are underperforming, and flagship financing and programming for health sector and productive sectors. Particularly, we are talking about agriculture, which employs some 80% of the population, industry, trade, water, environment, lands and housing, and tourism. If these are done, we think in NDP III, Uganda will reverse the subdued gross domestic product, the GDP, growth rates back to the high gross performance levels through annual budgets and over the NDP III period. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Siatini, you may wish to add on something?
Yeah.
So that we, hold on, we are just closer to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, moderator, and thank you, fellow panelists, for the insights. I just have 4 short additions, commentaries to add onto this statement. The first one speaks about looks at the current condition, the environment through which under which the NDP III is performing, is being launched. NDP III, unfortunately, has come at a point of COVID-19, at a point where the economy has shrunk, at a point where debt, due to increased borrowing, debt levels have grown, at a point where poverty and inequalities have increased, people have lost jobs, and it is at the same time coming at a point where discussions about resuscitating the economy, rebuilding the economy post-COVID-19 is on the rise. Unfortunately, like my former colleagues mentioned, one thing that is required is fiscal discipline, financial discipline. When you look at some of the policies and government strategies that have to be revisited, decentralization policy under NDP III has to be revisited. Why am I saying this? Our statement is talking about the stadium-like of members of parliament that are going to be in this the coming parliament. Let's take an example of India. India has a population of 1.3 billion. It has a total number of 543 members of parliament. India's economy is close to 5 times bigger than that of Uganda. Uganda has a population of 46 million, and our members of parliament will be close to 600,000. That is already a very huge number. So we need to rethink the decentralization policy. And that already, you have to look at the fact that there is already a proposal that the coming parliament, their salary be increased from 20 million per month to close to 40 million. That is already a very huge challenge. And who is going to be affected? The taxpayer, me and you. So I think that is one of the things we need to revisit the decentralization policy by ensuring fiscal discipline. The second issue I would like to talk about is on how do we rebuild the economy. the productive sectors, we need to go beyond the usual narrative, usual rhetoric of productive sectors. One of the productive sectors we are talking about is agriculture and trade. But beyond this umbrella, there are key players in these sectors, like the micro, small and medium enterprises. These form 90% of Uganda's manufacturing output. In terms of employment, they employ more, close to 3 million Ugandans people. So when we are talking about rebuilding economy post-COVID-19 under NDP III, and when we are talking about increasing domestic resource mobilization in order to reduce on the, what Kawopo was talking about, in order to reduce on the grants and loans coming from development partners, we need to finance MSMEs. We need to finance this critical component of the economy to be able to increase on their production, to be able to address their production challenges, and be able to contribute to Uganda's revenue resource envelope. Of course, this can only be attained through increasing resource allocation, budget allocation to the trade sector. The talk of having the theme of the budget talking about trade and industrialization for wealth creation and shared prosperity, when the sector is only getting 0.4%, that is mchezo, that is just playing. That is not really being passionate about rebuilding the economy, about structural transformation, especially post-COVID-19. Lastly is the issue of health sector. The NDP III also has to really to look at how do you realign resources to address the issue of high out-of-pocket fees in the health sector. Currently, Uganda, many of the, in terms of revenue to domestic revenue to the health sector, over 60% comes through costs charged from patients, out-of-pocket fees. And that is really challenging when you compare really exactly, specifically the kind of population that we do have. You know, we are looking at the hungry people, you're looking at the poor people. So we need to realign resources in the NDP III and the budget, subsequent budgets, to ensure that we address the issue of high out-of-pocket fees to be able to increase on the right to health and ensure that the more marginalized people have increased access to health services. Thank you so much.
From looking at the current perspective, of course, currently it's very hard to distance COVID from the entire arrangement of borrowing. And the advantage we have realized is there are issues we have been over and again complaining about to government. And government has been giving us a dead ear. And if you look at COVID vis-a-vis our systems, you realize that it has stripped us naked. And one of the issues we would strongly call upon government to put in place or to make work is its systems, the service delivery systems, across board. One of the current examples that we've found to be relevant in the context is the creation of task forces, yet you're supposed to have systems that are supposed to operate in such emergencies. And no wonder recently we saw things in the media, a rumor where we are saying most of the COVID money, of course, it has disappeared. And what does it tell Ugandans if you have health centers and they are creating Nambole Stadium to treat COVID patients? And for us to realize these are all indicators that show that our systems are not working. You look at the NDP II, it had aggressive targets. For example, we wanted to see a transformed economy in the agriculture sector where farmers are no longer subsistent but operating on a commercial basis. But what's happening currently, we are still having the same story, and that's when we were promised that Uganda will be in middle income by 2020. Now 2020 we even have COVID, so chances are high that we shall be there in 2022. Luckily, our neighbors, Tanzania, was able to come to middle income within the pandemic. So what does it tell Uganda? Our systems, one, they must work, but where are we also putting our money? If you look at the core sectors that are supposed to give us revenue, government is not investing heavily in them. We have international declarations where we are centered to, and we say government must allocate about 10% of the national budget to the agriculture sector and about 15% to the health sector. But what's happening currently? You realize that government is hugely relying on donors as opposed to it making deliberate efforts to fund these sectors. And when you go to OWC and then the NADS, even the investment there is non-strategic. When you go to the ground and you give each farmer 1 kilogram of a seed to plant, that means you're more promoting resource wastage as opposed to investing. And now you realize that the same farmers all over and again, they are still relying on government to give them inputs. Yeah, these are monies that are supposed to take us somewhere, but it all comes back to systems. Let's have our systems working. Let's have accountability systems. And of course, without these systems, we are seeing more of impunity. People are now stealing money without having remorse because they know no one will deal with them. And from our angle of accountability, we really see that this is taking our country, it's burying us deeper. We want to see every penny doing what it's supposed to do. Then the other observation is, of course, the creation of administrative units, or what we call local governments, more administrative units. This has served hugely the political interests. But when you go to services, of course, the argument is we are bringing services closer to the people. But you have districts that are already underperforming. You have districts that don't have general hospitals. That's what some, and then you have sub-counties that have been created without having secondary schools. So that means we already have gaps that we must fill. But before these gaps are filled, already we are creating more and more and more administrative units. So when you link it to debt performance, you realize that we are borrowing a lot, but this money is not, it's not serving the purpose of its true intention. And us as transparency, we really want systems to work. We want government to invest wisely where we shall really get the revenue, not just firing stray bullets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. We could now have questions or comments, whether for clarification or anything else, and directed to any one of us, and we shall gladly take them on before we switch to Uganda and other languages. Yes, you didn't introduce yourself. You could take the opportunity and also pose your comment or question.
All right, sorry I came in a little bit late.
You were delayed.
So I'm not very sure whether this question was raised, but I'm interested in knowing whether the NDP III, which is the focus of the discussion here today, will actually deliver us to the middle income status. We've seen, we struggled with the previous one. He has just said that even in the pandemic situation, Tanzania seems to have found its way in there. Will this be the magic bullet for the middle income status? I would like to comment on all that.
Okay, I can take that one. Yes?
Yes, we'll take it.
Any other question or comment? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Isaac from Benjamin again. I just want to know, understand about investment infrastructure. Do you think we have done enough that we now need to shift? Is that enough that the government has done? Connectivity, roads, and so on.
Yeah.
Smart 24. Smart business.